Hi, welcome to phase 3 of Mire Learn Korean in 40 days. And in this phase, we'll be studying Hangul, which is the Korean writing system. And by the end of this phase, you'll be able to read Korean. So that's exciting. And before we get started, I want to read some of Chu Parent's words. As a unified world is the goal. You should complete the reading of my speeches in the unified language. What will you do if you cannot even read those books in the original language? You need to read them in my language, not in English or German. The books of my speeches contain a lifetime's worth of my words. Chu Father. More and more scholars in the world are trying to learn the Korean language so that they can read all the volumes of my speeches in the original language. These words lose authority when translated or interpreted. Therefore, you should be able to read those words. Shouldn't you be able to read those volumes in the original language at least once? Chu Father. Myth. Being able to listen to and understand Chu Parent's speeches is the goal. Truth. Koreans don't even understand Chu Father's speeches fully. More often than not, Chu Father's accent, tone, and vocabulary is so unique that it's often not understood by even native Koreans. Therefore, it's not a productive use of our time to attempt to understand Chu Father's spoken words without first having a solid foundation in fundamental Korean. Reading Chu Parent's words through Hangul, which is written Korean, and understanding the meaning behind the words is our primary goal. The good news is that Korean is one of the easiest languages in the world to read. No matter what your native language may be, I'm confident that you can learn to read Korean in only one day with complete focus, not accounting for speed and comprehension, of course. The reason for this is simple. There are only 14 consonants and 7 vowels with various alternations in the Korean language, and almost everything is pronounced exactly as expected. That's Korean consonants. I have 3 helpful tips for memorizing these 14 Korean consonants. Number 1 is write the Korean consonants on a piece of paper as you pronounce the consonants out loud. This will help you associate the image of the consonant with its respective pronunciation. In other words, when you're learning or memorizing one consonant, write it on a piece of paper at the same time pronounce it out loud so that you associate the sound of it as well as the image of what it looks like. This is very helpful when you start reading. Helpful tip number 2, test yourself by covering the English pronunciation on the right side with a piece of paper and reciting each Korean symbol. If you forget one of the symbols, don't fret, just start over and drill yourself again. Make a note though that you only need to drill yourself from Korean to English, not from English to Korean. Because our goal is to read Korean, and that doesn't require us to go from English to Korean, so only Korean to English is necessary. And the third tip is to use the link below is ucproducts.org/audio to help with the pronunciation, and there are audio files there that will help you with pronunciation. So memorizing these 14 consonants may take you 30 minutes to an hour to 2 hours to memorize all of them. Once you have memorized them and you feel confident about them, you can move on to Korean vowels, which is the next section. Korean vowels. Korean vowels are a bit more difficult to memorize than consonants because they look very similar to each other, but I have 4 study tips that will help you to memorize these vowels. Number 1 is focus on the pronunciation of each consonant and vowel. Number 2 is write the Korean vowels on a piece of paper as you pronounce the vowel out loud. Helpful tip number 3, create and memorize a song or phrase that pronounces each vowel in order. For example, in English we have the ABC song, which is an easy way for children to memorize the order and the pronunciation of all the letters. In Korean, I've created a phrase or song that goes like this. Aoi. It's kind of, it sounds like aoi, so that's a phrase that'll help you memorize it. And the 4th and final tip for learning vowels is to go to the audio link and hear the pronunciation. So once you've memorized and feel confident about these 7 vowels in Korean, then you can go on to the next one, which is combination vowels. Combination vowels. The combination vowels are so called because they combine 2 vowels, which you learned in the previous section, to form a new vowel. And you can use the same study tips that were mentioned and used for consonants and vowels when memorizing these vowels. Y-vowels. Y-vowels are very easy to memorize. They're so called because they are the same as the initial 7 vowels that you learned before, but pronounced with a Y sound, a Y sound at the beginning of the vowel, and that's notated by 2 parallel double lines. For example, A becomes Ya, O becomes Yo, U becomes U, etc. Self-examination. This self-examination is a self-test to see if you've retained what you've been studying. So if you can complete the self-examination in your book and finish the exercises from start to finish without making any mistakes, then you're good and you're ready to move on to the next section, which is actually reading Korean. So reading Korean is very simple. It is as simple as just putting vowels and consonants together and pronouncing them. Here are just a few rules that make Hangul come together. Rule number 1. Every syllable in Korean contains 1 consonant, 1 vowel, and then another optional consonant. For example, ta has 1 consonant and 1 vowel. 달 has 1 consonant, 1 vowel, and then another consonant. Rule number 2. In some words, there may occasionally be a 3rd consonant. This is more rare, but sometimes you will see it. Rule number 3. Every syllable in Korean is pronounced in the order of 1st consonant, vowel, 2nd consonant, and 3rd consonant. It might sound a bit confusing right now, but if you look at the Korean words, you will understand it. Rule number 4, double consonants. So there are 5 consonants that sometimes appear as double consonants, and it simply means that they're pronounced extra strongly, with more emphasis. However, every language has a set of very silly reading rules that are annoying to memorize, but they're very important. Luckily for us, Korean has just a few that we have to learn. Silly rule number 1, the consonant which is a circle, is always silent when it is the syllable initial position. Silly rule number 2, the consonant s is pronounced as sh, not as s, when it is in the syllable initial position and placed before some very specific vowels. And you can see some examples in the book. Silly rule number 3, T consonants. So there are 6 consonants in Korean that are pronounced as t when they are at the syllable final position. For example, this syllable is pronounced as got, not as gos. So in the reading practice section, your task is to read the sentences, the 6 sentences out loud, say it out loud. Even if it's very slow, don't worry about reading fast or understanding the content for now. You will be able to read faster and understand these sentences by the end of the book. So if you've completed the reading section, then that means you can read Korean now. Don't worry if you're very slow or you don't even understand a lot of the words. That's fine, that'll come over time. But right now we just have to get the reading done with. So before we go on to the next phase, give yourself a pat on the back, good job. And in the next phase, we're going to study the frequently used vocabulary and grammar of true parents. And this is the real meat of this book, is learning the actual phrases and words used by true parents. And now that you can read, it'll be a lot easier. So give yourself a pat on the back and see you next time. God bless.